Most painters don't think much about their brushes.
For some, brush choice is such a secondary thing that they assign each brush to a single family of color and stick with it. Like brush A is for blue, brush B is for brown, and so on. Some people go as far as painting with only two brushes, one for the darks and one for the lights.
And I think that this is one of the most limiting things that you can do. If you're doing this, please stop. No brush should be bound to a given color. That's not the right approach, and I want to prove it to you today. Every brush leaves a unique mark, and this is what should be guiding you when deciding which one to pick. So stop assigning your brush to a given color and start choosing the right one depending on the job. Alright, so don't assign a brush to a color. A brush should never be bound to a color, no matter what it is. The color should always follow the direction of the brush, not the other way around. You need all sorts of shapes and sizes. One single brush can't paint everything. This is why assigning your brush to the dark and to the light can't work long term, because there will always be a time when your dark brush simply doesn't have the right size or the right shape to fit the area that you want to paint. So just get a decent variety of shapes, hair types, and sizes, and clean your brush properly with a rag before changing color. You shouldn't let your brush choice be decided by the idea that you can't clean up a brush from its color. You absolutely can. Simply drag your brush on a piece of rag or use a paper towel. It won't clean it 100%, but it's okay. The old color is only residual. If you pick up enough of the new color, and if you don't exhaust your brush by brushing 100 times, you won't see any traces of the old paint. Remember to pick the right amount of the new paint and to go back to the palette as soon as you run out of it. Now, let me say this. If you need to paint something really white, it's definitely a good idea to not use this brush for other colors, or it will be polluted and then your next white strokes will be dirty. So only for the most extreme colors like pure white or pure black, yes, you might want to assign a single brush to each, but that's it.
And if you really want to use a sort of a minimalist approach and only use two brushes, I'm totally on board. I love the idea, but I still wouldn't assign a color to each brush. And I would still try to pick two brushes that are as diverse and generalist as possible, like these two, for example, so that each one can do what the other can't. It's a good idea to unclutter your hands, and a 2 or 3 brush set sounds cool. It forces you to explore the full potential of each brush. What's not cool is saying that a certain brush is only for red and another one is only for blue, etc. The color is supposed to do what the brush says, not the other way around.
It's also worth noting that some brushes are really good generalists. For example, this kind of medium-sized rounds is a brush that I use in many situations. I think they work great for most of the things I try to paint. And this is typically the kind of brush that I would take with me on a desert island if I could only pick one single brush. But in my own studio, I don't need to limit myself to a single brush, so I don't assign a brush to a color, and I usually get a wide variety of shapes and sizes, usually between 10 and 15. I always say one for each finger, and you can hold a couple extras with your toes if you want. This is how I remember it. 10 to 15 is a good choice. If you want to learn more about brushes and everything oil painting, you can check out my oil painting course. The Practical Guide to Oil Painting has everything you need to get started and even explore the more advanced techniques. I'll leave the links in the description. Each brush has a different kind of touch, and you want to use it at your advantage and not limit yourself. Brushes must perform 5 fundamental functions: tracing, flattening, blending, spreading, and thickening. And of course, the same brush can't do everything right. So first, let's see these functions very quickly. Tracing means that the brush needs to leave a linear mark that will remain visible after it's applied, like drawing with a pencil if you want. Flattening means that the color is spread evenly on a given surface and leveled, like what you do with a house painting roller brush, for example. Blending implies merging the paint newly applied to previously applied wet paint. This function is comparable to what a blending stump does in drawing. Spreading involves extending a small quantity of paint on a larger surface, like what you would do with a broom, pushing the paint around. And finally, thickening implies bringing more body to the paint with a generous layer of paint called an impasto, like what you would do with a trowel or what you sometimes do with a palette knife. Your brush choice shouldn't be about color, but mostly about the kind of touch that you desire. Stiff, bristle brushes like hog hair are perfect for sculpting thick paint, laying it bold shapes, or pushing paint across a textured surface. They grab paint off the palette and deliver energetic brushstrokes. They are a favorite of those who prefer a thick, alla prima style, very snappy, very energetic. On the other hand, the soft brushes like the mongoose, the soft synthetic, the sables are better for blending, laying down clean edges. They create that refined look that you often see in skin tones where you have like this perfect transition and minute details. They're usually preferred by tight painters who want a high level of detail and soft, carefully blended transitions. The real question that you have to ask yourself is, do you want the trace of your brush marks to remain visible or not in the final result? And that's a personal choice. It's your artistic decision to make. Do you want those bold alla prima brush marks in your final painting? In that case, you might want something more snappy and energetic that will leave more texture. And if you're going for something more tight and want to get rid of the brush texture, then you want something more soft to just caress the surface very carefully, removing all the traces of your hand until just the illusion of the subject remains visible. The brush shape isn't just a personal preference, it's all about the geometry and what each shape allows you to do. Flats give you sharp edges and big blocking power. They're also great to trace lines when used sideways. Rounds are great for lines and precision. They're also excellent for intricate transition within the human figure. They can reach small areas that others simply can't. Filberts combine both the blocking power and the smooth transition. They're really the workhorse of many oil painters. They are very generous brushes. Now let's talk about the fans, the fan brushes. They are not just for blending, and in fact, I don't really recommend them too much for blending because they're just too big and they don't hold their shape really well when they become full of paint. They're meant to be used empty, but they can be a little bit destructive for your carefully painted transitions. To blend, I'd rather use a soft filbert, for example, or even an old plain soft round brush or any soft brush of any kind, because they usually work better because they're just as soft and they retain more paint and they can soften transition in a more subtle, more controlled way where the fan brush is just sometimes messing it all up. But fan brushes can be useful, mostly to remove the unwanted bristle texture. You use it dry and clean and you lightly feather across the canvas downwards right before it has time to dry. It will get rid of the unwanted peaks and unpleasant stripy texture. Just do it carefully and go easy. And remember that if you don't want any of these stripy textures that the brush sometimes leaves, you have to keep your brush strokes vertical and push down. We all do this very naturally every time. We open our hand and reach for a brush, but which one you pick is probably one of the most crucial decisions that you're not really thinking that much about. Here's finally a list of criteria explaining how to objectively pick the best brush for the job. First, here's what you should know about brushes. Your brush's behavior depends on three things: its string, how it bends, its load, how much paint it can hold, and its release, how easily it lets go of the paint. Each brush is unique and you need to understand how to make each one work. It's going to take a lot of experimenting to be familiar with your brush and break it until it becomes really usable and you get familiar with it. As I said already, I think that between 10 and 15 brushes is the right choice. 1 for each finger and 5 that you can hold with your toes. That's how I like to memorize it. But now, in this selection of 10 to 15, how do you know which one to pick? The first thing you have to consider is the size of the area to paint. By default, always pick the biggest brush at your disposal that will fit in the area and make sure that you consider all the potential of your brush. For example, this big flat wouldn't fit to paint the thumb here, but if you use it sideways, it will. However, technically, a better fit for this thumb would be this filbert that, as you can see here, perfectly covers the surface to paint. The second thing you have to ask yourself is what function is the stroke supposed to fulfill? Is it supposed to trace, flatten, blend, spread, or thicken? The third question is what kind of softness or spring do you need? Do you ultimately want the brush mark to remain visible or not? And finally, you want to consider the feeling. Just visualize your hand gesture in advance, and it should feel natural and pleasant. It shouldn't feel forced. It's all a matter of flow. You have to make one with your instruments, and ultimately your brush will become a natural extension of your hand. A brush is a means of expression, not just a utensil for moving paint. When you choose the right one with clear intentions, your painting suddenly starts to make sense and you have a lot of fun with it. This connection between your hand and your canvas, this is when art really begins.